FBI Special Agent Lauren Harris leaned back in the driver's seat of her car, finally allowing herself a moment to breathe. The culmination of weeks of relentless work had paid off with the successful resolution of a high-stakes case. The investigation had demanded every ounce of her focus and energy, but she had delivered, bringing justice to a family desperate for answers. Her shoulders, once heavy with the weight of responsibility, now felt lighter. The sun dipped low in the sky, painting the horizon with shades of orange and pink. As Lauren drove through the quiet streets of her city, she allowed herself to smile. This was a rare moment of triumph, and she relished the thought of going home to unwind. She imagined her cozy living room, the soft glow of her reading lamp, and the comfort of her favorite book waiting for her. It felt like the reward she truly deserved after the grueling days she had endured. Before we get down to business, we want to hear your opinion. Write to us in the comments, what is your name and from which city are you watching us? Your support is very important to us. We will be grateful if you like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for participating with us in this important project. Her car radio played a soothing jazz tune, filling the silence with gentle melodies. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel the constant tension of the job. Lauren reflected on the milestones she had achieved throughout her career. Being a black woman in the FBI was no small feat. She had faced countless challenges and doubters along the way, yet she had persevered, proving to herself and others that she belonged. As the city lights began to flicker on, Lauren's mind wandered to the people she had helped during the case. She thought of the victims and their families, who could finally find peace now that justice had been served. It was moments like these that reminded her why she had joined the Bureau in the first place, to make a difference, to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Lost in her thoughts, she didn't notice the patrol car pulling up behind her until the sharp wail of a siren broke through the serene atmosphere. Startled, she glanced into the rearview mirror to see the flashing red and blue lights. A frown crept onto her face as she signaled and pulled over to the side of the road. What could this possibly be about? Little did Lauren know, the peace she had worked so hard to earn was about to be shattered in a way she could have never anticipated. Lauren rolled down her window as the officer approached, his posture stiff and intimidating. "License and registration," he barked, without any hint of courtesy. Lauren's professional instincts kicked in. She reached into her glove compartment and handed over her ID and FBI badge. Instead of the respect she was accustomed to receiving, the officer's face twisted into a scornful sneer. "What is this supposed to be?" he asked, holding the badge up as if it were a counterfeit bill. "You expect me to believe you're an FBI agent?" Lauren remained calm, her voice steady but firm. "That badge is real, officer. I'm Special Agent Lauren Harris. Is there a specific reason you pulled me over?" The officer's eyes narrowed, his disbelief quickly turning into open hostility. "You think you can just flash this and get out of trouble? Step out of the vehicle. Now." Her pulse quickened, but she complied, exiting the car with deliberate, measured movements. The officer's tone grew harsher as he demanded she turn around. Before she could explain further, he roughly grabbed her wrists and snapped on a pair of cold, metal handcuffs. "This is ridiculous," Lauren said, trying to keep her voice even. "If you'd just check my credentials." "Enough," he interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension. "We'll sort this out at the station." As she was escorted to the patrol car, a small crowd began to gather. Strangers watched the scene unfold, their whispers and stares cutting into Lauren like knives. Some raised their phones, recording the encounter. Humiliation surged through her. She was an accomplished federal agent, yet here she was, treated like a common criminal. Inside the patrol car, the weight of the cuffs bit into her wrists. The officer's silence only amplified the indignity of the moment. She stared out the window, her mind racing. How had it come to this? Why couldn't he see past her skin color to the truth of who she was? The drive to the precinct felt like an eternity, each second an agonizing reminder of the prejudice she had spent her life battling. By the time they arrived, her resolve to set things right had only hardened. This was not just about her, it was about the countless others who had endured similar injustices. Lauren's heart sank as the officer led her into the precinct, past rows of desks and curious glances from other officers. Every step felt heavier than the last. She kept her head high, refusing to let the humiliation show on her face, even as the officer shoved her roughly into a chair near an interrogation room. "Stay put," he barked, as though she were some sort of dangerous criminal. Lauren gritted her teeth, the cold metal of the cuffs digging into her wrists a constant reminder of the unjust treatment she was enduring. Around her, officers bustled about, occasionally casting a glance her way. None of them intervened. After what felt like hours, the officer returned, a smug expression plastered across his face. "Let's make this simple. Who are you really, and where were you going?" he demanded, leaning against the table with an air of arrogance. Lauren's voice remained calm, though her patience was wearing thin. "I've already told you. My name is Special Agent Lauren Harris. I was on my way home after finishing a case. If you would check my badge and contact my office, this could be cleared up immediately." The officer's laugh was cold and mocking. "Special Agent, huh? That's a good one. Do you think I'm an idiot?" Frustration bubbled beneath Lauren's composed exterior, but she held it back. "You have my credentials. Verify them." "Sure," he said with a smirk, clearly having no intention of doing so. Instead, he motioned for another officer. "Take her to holding. I've had enough of her games." Lauren's protests were ignored as she was led to a holding cell. The small, dimly lit room reeked of sweat and despair. Inside, a handful of other detainees turned to stare at her, their expressions ranging from curious to indifferent. The heavy metal door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing in the cramped space. She sat down on the cold bench, her mind racing. How could this be happening? She had dedicated her life to justice, and yet here she was, stripped of her dignity and locked up like a criminal. Her thoughts turned to the officer who had brought her here. His hostility, his refusal to verify her credentials, it all pointed to one thing: this wasn't about the law. This was about prejudice. Hours turned into an endless night. Lauren's anger simmered beneath the surface, fueling her determination. She would not let this injustice stand. But for now, she had no choice but to wait and endure the indignity of her situation, knowing that the truth would eventually come to light. Exhausted and humiliated, Lauren woke to the clatter of keys echoing through the dreary precinct. A new officer, younger and more professional in demeanor, walked through the corridor, conducting the routine morning check of the holding cells. His gaze fell on her, and confusion clouded his expression. "Wait a second," he muttered under his breath before stopping in his tracks. "Aren't you Agent Harris from the Bureau?" Lauren's head shot up, a flicker of hope breaking through her weariness. "Yes. Finally, someone who recognizes me. I've been wrongfully detained." The officer immediately unlocked the cell door, his face pale with shock and concern. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. There's been a terrible mistake." The other detainees watched in silence as Lauren stood, her pride battered but still intact. The officer helped her out of the cell and led her into an empty office. He handed her a phone, allowing her to contact her FBI supervisor, who confirmed her identity within minutes. As the truth came to light, the atmosphere in the precinct shifted dramatically. The officer who had arrested her returned from his break, his smug confidence evaporating when he saw Lauren being released. "What's going on here?" he demanded, but the younger officer cut him off sharply. "You arrested an FBI agent without verifying her credentials. Do you realize what you've done?" The disdain in his voice was clear, and Lauren felt a grim satisfaction as the officer who had humiliated her fumbled for an explanation. Lauren didn't say a word to him. She refused to waste her breath on someone so consumed by prejudice. Instead, she took her badge and belongings, squaring her shoulders as she walked out of the precinct. But this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Back at the FBI headquarters, Lauren filed an official complaint. Determined to uncover the full extent of the officer's misconduct, she initiated an internal investigation. The evidence that emerged painted a horrifying picture. The officer had a long history of targeting black individuals, fabricating charges, and abusing his authority. Case after case revealed a pattern of racially motivated behavior. With the Bureau's resources at her disposal, Lauren gathered irrefutable evidence and handed it over to a trusted civil rights attorney. Together, they built a case against the officer, ensuring that his actions would not go unpunished. The trial that followed was a watershed moment, exposing the deep-seated biases that had plagued the precinct for years. In the courtroom, Lauren faced her tormentor once more. This time, she was not a victim but a warrior for justice. The officer's smug demeanor was gone, replaced by the fear of accountability. When the guilty verdict was announced, Lauren felt a sense of vindication, not just for herself, but for everyone who had suffered under his abuse of power. As the officer was led away in handcuffs, Lauren stood tall, her resolve unshaken. She had turned her pain into purpose, proving that even in the face of systemic injustice, perseverance and truth could prevail. Walking out of the courthouse, she vowed to continue her fight for equality, knowing that her work was far from over. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Journalists filled the back rows, their cameras and notepads ready to capture every moment. Members of the community, many of them victims of the same officer's abuse, sat silently, their faces a mixture of anger and hope. At the center of it all stood Lauren, poised and unwavering, ready to see justice served. The trial had become a high-profile case, drawing national attention to systemic racism within law enforcement. The evidence Lauren and her team had gathered left no room for doubt. Each testimony, each document, each recorded incident painted a damning portrait of the officer's misconduct. He had fabricated charges, used excessive force, and disproportionately targeted people of color during his years on the force. His actions had ruined countless lives, but now, justice was finally catching up to him. Lauren took the stand on the final day of the trial. The courtroom fell silent as she recounted her experience in vivid detail, the humiliation of being handcuffed in public, the dehumanization of being locked in a cell despite her innocence, and the overwhelming resolve she felt to make sure no one else would endure the same. "I wear this badge not just as a symbol of authority, but as a promise, to uphold justice for everyone, regardless of race or background," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "What happened to me wasn't an isolated incident. It was the result of unchecked prejudice and abuse of power. But today, we have the chance to set a precedent, to show that no one is above the law." Her words struck a chord, resonating deeply with the jury and the public alike. The defense's attempts to discredit her fell flat, overwhelmed by the mountain of evidence and the officer's undeniable record of misconduct. Finally, after weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict: guilty on multiple counts, including abuse of power, falsifying charges, and racially motivated discrimination. The room erupted in a collective sigh of relief, some people even breaking into applause. Lauren remained composed, but a quiet sense of victory glimmered in her eyes. The officer was sentenced to prison, his fall from power a stark reminder that accountability applies to all. For Lauren, however, this was not just about punishing one man, it was about shining a light on the broader issues within the system. She knew that one trial wouldn't solve everything, but it was a start. In the days that followed, Lauren received an outpouring of support. Messages flooded in from people across the country, Black women thanking her for her courage, families of other victims who finally felt seen, and allies who vowed to join the fight for reform. Her case became a rallying cry, inspiring grassroots movements and renewed calls for change within the justice system. Lauren returned to her office at the FBI, greeted by colleagues who now looked at her with a deeper respect. Her supervisor commended her for her bravery, but Lauren shrugged it off. "I just did what needed to be done," she said simply. Though she was proud of what she had accomplished, Lauren knew her work was far from over. The fight against racial injustice was ongoing, and she was determined to continue using her platform to bring about change. She partnered with civil rights organizations, advocating for better training and accountability measures within law enforcement. She also worked on initiatives to build trust between police departments and the communities they served. One evening, as she sat in her living room, the same comforting space she had longed for during that fateful night, Lauren reflected on her journey. What had started as a personal ordeal had become a movement for justice, and she was proud to be a part of it. She knew the road ahead would be long and challenging, but she felt ready. As she looked out the window at the city she had sworn to protect, Lauren made a silent promise to herself and the countless others who had been wronged: she would never stop fighting for a world where justice truly prevailed for everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video to show your support.